The sun was sinking low on the horizon when three black SUVs rolled up to my driveway, engines humming like a storm about to break. Doors swung open in sync, and six men stepped out, tactical vests strapped tight, badges gleaming in the fading light. At the front stood their leader, a tall, stone-faced man clutching a thick folder. Behind him, smirking with the confidence of someone who thought they'd already won, was Karen. Karen had been harassing me since the day I moved in. Tonight, she had come to finish the job. Before we dive into this intense story, we have a small favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far our stories reach. Thank you so much. Now let's dive in. You are in violation of HOA regulations, the leader announced, his voice smooth but commanding. We have a warrant for your removal. I could feel Karen's satisfaction radiating from behind him. She thought this was checkmate. She thought she was about to watch me get dragged off my own property like some helpless fool. What she didn't know? The officer stepping out of the next cruiser was one of mine. And what happened next wouldn't just expose her scam, it would bring down an entire criminal empire. There's a certain kind of peace you expect when you buy a home. That feeling of ownership, your land, your rules. I had worked my entire life for that peace. After years of relocating for work, renting from greedy landlords, and living out of suitcases, I was finally settling down. At least, that's what I thought. The day I moved in, before I even finished unloading boxes, I noticed her. Karen, standing across the street, arms folded, a clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. She had the look of someone who had been running the neighborhood like a kingdom for years, and she wasn't happy about the new arrival. I gave her a polite nod. She didn't return it. She just stared. That was my first warning. The second came the next morning. I stepped outside, stretching in the morning sun, only to find a bright red violation notice taped to my front door. I frowned, peeling it off. HOA violation. Immediate action required. Violation #1. Unapproved mailbox design. Violation #2. Non-compliant landscaping. Violation #3. Failure to register with the HOA. I blinked. I had barely unpacked my kitchen boxes, and I didn't even have an HOA. I checked my purchase documents. No mention of an association, no contract signed. So I did what any reasonable homeowner would do. I crumpled the notice and tossed it in the trash. Big mistake. That afternoon I heard the sharp click of heels against my driveway. I turned, wiping sweat from my forehead as I set down a box. Karen, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. "Afternoon," she greeted, her voice syrupy sweet, but her expression anything but friendly. "I assume you got the notice?" I smirked. "Yeah, I threw it away." Her lips twitched. That wasn't a suggestion. I raised an eyebrow. "That's funny because I never signed up for an HOA. Karen's smirk deepened. "Your street was annexed into our association last year," she said smoothly. "So yes, you are a member." I let out a short laugh. "You can't just vote people into an HOA." She shrugged. "We already have." I took a step closer, voice steady. "I never signed anything. I don't owe you a damn thing." Karen's expression hardened. "You will comply," she snapped. "If you refuse, we will escalate." I folded my arms. "To who?" She lifted her chin. "The authorities." I stared at her for a long moment. Then I shrugged. "Go ahead." Karen's eye twitched. She had expected resistance. She hadn't expected defiance. She turned on her heel and stormed away. An hour later, 3 more violation notices were taped to my fence. The next day, a $500 fine for non-compliance appeared on my door. I laughed and tossed it straight in the trash. But that night, my security cameras caught something interesting. Karen, flashlight in hand, taking pictures of my house. She wasn't just harassing me, she was building a case. And that's when I knew this wasn't over. Over the next week, the attacks escalated. More fines, more violations, more late-night visits. Then came the intimidation. One afternoon, I was unloading boxes from my truck when I noticed 2 men in reflective vests standing in my driveway. They weren't from the city. They weren't contractors. And they sure as hell weren't supposed to be on my property. I walked over, arms crossed. "Can I help you?" One of them barely glanced up. "Routine HOA inspection, sir." I frowned. "You're on private property. Get off my land." The man smirked. "Not according to HOA records." That's when I noticed the patches on their sleeves. Neighborhood Compliance Officer, a title that meant absolutely nothing. I stepped forward, voice low. I'm only going to say this once. Leave, now. The second man shifted uncomfortably, but the first just grinned. You'll regret this. They left. But I knew this wasn't over. That night, my power mysteriously went out. My mailbox was smashed in. My car was keyed. I called the police. They told me there was no evidence linking it to the HOA. That's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with an annoying HOA, I was dealing with criminals. So I started digging. I went to the county clerk's office looking for any official records on the HOA. What I found? There was no HOA. Karen's organization wasn't registered. She had no legal authority. But that hadn't stopped her from collecting dues, issuing fines, threatening foreclosure. I spent the next few days talking to neighbors, gathering information. And what I learned? Karen's operation had been going on for years. Most homeowners, tired of the harassment, had simply paid up. Some had even sold their homes just to escape her. She wasn't just a power-hungry control freak, she was a con artist. And those so-called neighborhood compliance officers, they weren't just HOA enforcers, they were her enforcers. And that's when I made my decision. I was going to bring Karen down. I knew Karen wouldn't stop. She had spent years tightening her grip on this neighborhood, turning it into her personal empire, shaking down homeowners like a crime boss running a protection racket. But I wasn't like the others. I wasn't going to roll over and hand her a check just to make her go away. I was going to expose her, and I was going to take her down. That night, I reinforced my security system. More cameras, more floodlights, motion sensors. Then, at 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. I checked the feed. 2 men, dressed in black, standing in my driveway. One pointed toward my house, the other pulled something from his pocket. I grabbed my gun and stepped outside. You looking for something? They froze. One of them stuffed something into his jacket. Routine compliance check, one of them muttered. I smirked. At 2 in the morning? They didn't answer. Leave, I said. They didn't argue, but I knew this wasn't over. The next morning, I walked straight up to Karen's house and knocked, hard. She opened the door with her usual smug expression. I was wondering when you'd stop by. I held up my phone. Security footage, her men, trespassing on my property. She barely glanced at it. Maybe they were just making sure you weren't in violation. I stepped closer. You're running a scam, Karen, and it ends today. She sighed dramatically. You keep saying that, but let's be real, you're outnumbered. I stared at her, waiting. Because Karen had no idea who she was trying to intimidate. She wasn't just running a fake HOA, she was running a business, a scam, a well-oiled, highly coordinated extortion racket disguised as a community organization, and she had been getting away with it for years. Not anymore. I expected Karen to keep escalating. More fines, more fake notices, maybe another late-night trespasser with a flashlight. But I wasn't expecting this. Not 3 black SUVs rolling up to my house in broad daylight, engines idling, dark-tinted windows. The doors opened at the same time like they had rehearsed it. And then I saw them. 6 men, black tactical vests, utility belts, fake badges. And behind them, Karen, smirking like she had already won. This wasn't an HOA dispute anymore. This was intimidation. And she had come to make a statement. The tallest of the men stepped forward, square jaw, mirrored sunglasses. He held a thick folder of documents. You are in violation of HOA regulations, he announced. We have a warrant for your removal. I raised an eyebrow, my gaze shifting between the 6 so-called officers standing in my driveway. A warrant? I asked, feigning mild amusement. He nodded, flipping open the folder in his hands as if presenting irrefutable evidence. You are ordered to vacate the premises immediately, he said, his tone smug. Karen stepped forward, hands clasped in front of her like she was offering some twisted form of mercy. We gave you plenty of chances to comply, she sighed, shaking her head as if I had personally disappointed her. You chose this. You are in violation of HOA regulations, the man announced, his voice dripping with authority. We have a warrant for your removal. The words hung in the air, heavy, rehearsed, unnatural. I raised an eyebrow, letting the weight of his statement settle. 6 of them, standing in a stiff formation, too rigid to be natural. Their eyes flicked toward me, waiting for a reaction. A warrant? I asked, feigning mild amusement. The leader nodded, almost too quickly. With exaggerated precision, he flipped open the cheap black folder in his hands, holding it up as if it was some sacred decree. The edges of the paper inside were too crisp, too clean, freshly printed. The font, wrong. The formatting, off. Even from where I stood, I could see the low-quality seal stamped on the page. "You are ordered to vacate the premises immediately," he said, his tone smug, but there was an edge of impatience. Too eager, too forced, like he needed me to react a certain way. Karen stepped forward, slowly, her hands clasped in front of her like she was offering some twisted form of mercy. She took a deep breath, exhaling dramatically. "We gave you plenty of chances to comply," she sighed, shaking her head as if I had personally disappointed her. "You chose this." Her voice was dripping with condescension, like a teacher scolding a child for not turning in their homework. Like she wasn't standing there with 6 fake cops holding a fake warrant trying to evict a man from his own home. I stayed silent. I could feel every one of their eyes on me. Watching. Waiting. Instead, I studied them. Their uniforms were off. The patches on their sleeves, not department issued. The badges clipped to their vests. Too polished, too uniform, like they were fresh out of a box. Even their stance was wrong. They stood too stiff, too rigid, like they were trying to copy how real officers moved, but they had never actually worn a uniform before, like they had practiced this in front of a mirror, like they were playing cops in a low-budget movie. Karen wasn't just running an HOA scam. She had hired fake law enforcement, and she expected me to fall for it. I let out a slow, steady breath. One of the men shifted. He wasn't expecting the pause. He was expecting panic. I kept my voice calm, even. "I assume resisting would be a mistake?" The leader smirked, confident, cocky, like he had already won. "That would be obstruction," he said, shifting his weight slightly. His voice was measured, trying too hard to sound like a real officer, like he had practiced saying that line in a mirror. I nodded. "Right, just one thing before I go." Their postures tightened. The leader's grip on the folder subtly adjusted, his stance widening, like he was preparing for something. I reached into my pocket. Every single one of them tensed. I saw it, that fraction of a second where they braced, as if they expected me to run, to resist, to comply. I pulled out my badge, silence, the kind of silence that stretches long and heavy, like someone had just muted the entire world. Karen's smirk vanished. The lead enforcer, the one with the mirrored sunglasses and fake warrant, hesitated for the first time. I could see the gears turning in his head, scrambling for a way to salvage this disaster. The other fake officers stiffened, glancing at each other. One of them took a small step back. Another swallowed hard. They knew. They all knew. They weren't dealing with some clueless homeowner who would roll over and comply. They were dealing with the chief of police. And now, the game had changed. The leader cleared his throat, trying to recover. This doesn't change anything," he said, flipping through the pages of his fake warrant like it was suddenly going to transform into something real. "You're still in violation, and—" "Let me stop you right there," I interrupted. I held up my own badge, letting the setting sun glint off the metal. "Impersonating a law enforcement officer is a felony." Karen's face drained of color. The leader's jaw clenched. He knew he was in deep now. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Drop your weapons," I said, my voice calm but final, "and put your hands where I can see them." No one moved. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, from down the street, sirens, real ones. Karen whirled around, eyes widening as 3 squad cars came barreling down the street. They screeched to a stop, blocking the SUVs in. The second the doors flung open, my officers poured out, real ones in full uniform, weapons drawn. One of the fake enforcers panicked. He bolted. He made it 3 steps before my Lieutenant Reynolds tackled him to the ground. The others? They weren't dumb enough to run. Weapons clattered to the pavement. Hands went up. Karen? She just stood there, frozen in place, watching as her empire crumbled before her eyes. Reynolds approached, scanning the scene with thinly veiled amusement. "So what exactly are we looking at here, Chief?" I held up the phony warrant they had tried to serve me. "Attempted unlawful arrest, trespassing, fraud, impersonating law enforcement." Reynolds let out a low whistle. "Quite the HOA you've got here." Karen snapped out of it, rage flashing across her face. "This is a mistake," she shrieked. "I didn't do anything wrong." I turned to her, raising an eyebrow. You hired fake cops to force me out of my own house. That's not just wrong, Karen, it's criminal. Her jaw clenched. I had nothing to do with this, she insisted. I held up the phony documents. So these guys just magically showed up at my door with fraudulent paperwork? Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. For the first time, she had no comeback. Reynolds pulled out his radio. Dispatch, we need transport for multiple suspects. Fraud, impersonating law enforcement, conspiracy to commit a felony. Karen stiffened. She whipped around, looking at the remaining fake officers. Do something, she snapped. They just stared at the ground. One of them muttered, We were just doing what you told us. Karen turned back to me, desperation creeping into her voice. You don't understand. This is all a misunderstanding. I just stared at her. Misunderstanding? I repeated. You've been stealing from homeowners for years, Karen. I'd say you understood exactly what you were doing. She visibly paled. Then, from behind me, one of my officers emerged from Karen's house, holding a thick folder. He handed it to me. I flipped it open, and what I saw sealed Karen's fate. Inside the folder, bank records, fake property liens, fraudulent foreclosure notices. Karen hadn't just been scamming people. She had been stealing property. She had orchestrated a system to fine residents into submission, bury them in fake legal threats, then force them to sell their homes for less than they were worth. And then, she flipped them for profit. Tens of thousands of dollars in fake HOA dues, bogus fees, even forged property sales. She wasn't just a scam artist, she was a career criminal, and her so-called HOA officers, they were her enforcers. Her entire operation was built on fear and fraud. And now, it was over. Karen tried one last time. I was just trying to keep order in the community, she pleaded. I gave her a long look. Karen, let me ask you something. She swallowed hard. What? I leaned in slightly. Who gave you the idea for this scam? Her eyes darted away. Because Karen wasn't the mastermind. She was just a pawn. And when I dug deeper, I found out exactly who had been pulling the strings. Karen sat in the back of the squad car, muttering to herself, wrists cuffed behind her back. But I wasn't done yet. One of my officers walked up, handing me a stack of files pulled from her office. I flipped through them, and that's when I saw it. Karen wasn't the one pulling the strings. Her fake HOA wasn't just a scam. It was part of a massive real estate fraud ring. And at the top of the documents, a signature, a city official. Karen had been working with someone inside the system. That explained everything. How she had access to homeowner records, how she got away with stealing from people for years, how none of her victims had been able to fight back. She had a powerful ally, and now they were next. I handed the file to Reynolds. Get a team on this. We're taking them all down. The next week was a full-scale investigation. We raided multiple properties, seized millions in assets, arrested more board members, fake officers, and corrupt officials. Karen? She turned on them instantly, threw her partners under the bus in exchange for a lighter sentence. Turns out this scam had been running for over a decade. Fake HOAs, forged property deeds, illegal foreclosures, all orchestrated by a corrupt city administrator who had been covering for Karen the entire time. By the end of the month, dozens of arrests had been made. The scam was dismantled. The neighborhoods Karen had terrorized were finally free. The last time I saw Karen, she wasn't standing smugly in front of my house. She wasn't clutching phony violation notices or issuing empty threats. She was in court, shackled, shoulders slumped, face hollow, stripped of the power she had stolen for years. When the judge handed down her sentence, she barely reacted. 15 years, wire fraud, forgery, unlawful property seizures, and conspiracy to commit fraud on a massive scale. The corrupt city administrator gone. His name scrubbed from office. He took a plea deal, spilling everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe. Have you ever dealt with HOA nightmares like this? Let us know in the comments below. See you in the next one.